Amongst the impressive buildings of medieval Italy, the Leaning Tower of Pisa stands out as strikingly original.
The tower is something which is unique in the world.
But what makes this building so special may now destroy it. The tower is falling over, and already the top hangs 4.5 meters south of the base.
I'm astonished, given what I know about the fragility of the structure that is still standing.
Collapse might be triggered by a storm or an earthquake. It's very close.
Some engineers calculate that this collapse should have happened years ago. In fact, why it's still standing is one of the mysteries surrounding the Leaning Tower of Pisa. In 1995, Pisa's famous tower was falling over at the rate of about 1 millimeter a year. That September, an operation to halt this gradual topple reached a critical phase. One of those in charge of the engineering was Giorgio Macchi.
We have always been very nervous when we did any intervention on this tower, because the tower is reacting in a way which is not always the way we expect.
Operations continued round the clock, and throughout the first 36 hours went smoothly. But the patient remained under close observation. At 3:30 a.m. on September the 6th, the tower began to move. The next 9 hours, it fell as far as it had fallen in the previous 12 months. The engineers were woken in their beds.
Panic is not the word to use. Worried, yes. Concerned. And my concern was to get out here as quickly as possible and help in the decision-taking as to how we were going to stop the work, re-stabilize the tower.
The lurch was halted and an immediate collapse prevented. But what became known as Black September taught the engineers how even the best of modern science and technology will struggle to save this medieval enigma. Towers do collapse. In 1989, in Pavia, a few hundred miles north of Pisa, a 14th century bell tower collapsed, killing 4 bystanders. Pavia's tower wasn't even leaning. That's why the quest to rescue Pisa's tower was launched. A committee of brilliant minds has been assembled, and saving Pisa is now among the great prizes in civil engineering. Among those rising to the challenge is John Burland of Imperial College London.
When you come in through the west gate and see this glistening white structure looming over the cathedral, with its lovely symmetry, it is beautiful, but it's breathtaking. The fact that it hasn't fallen over, that it's just shimmering on the edge.
Burland, a soil engineer, digs into problems below the ground. But the committee contains equally determined experts who focus elsewhere, like Giorgio Macchi of Pavia University. A structural engineer, Macchi investigates weaknesses in the tower's masonry.
My work is on structural problems, so I saw immediately the structural risks. In my opinion, the tower is in real danger.
In 1989, Pisa's dangerous tower is closed to tourists. It's announced the closure may last just 3 months. There's little time for delay, and late 20th century engineering should make short work of this medieval relic. But the committee is soon bogged down in arguments which continue through many meetings over several years. Conflicting analyses of the tower become the subjects of furious debates, as there is rarely hard evidence that one is any more accurate than another. The tower turns out to be an engineering puzzle that cannot be unraveled in the way the committee members are familiar with. Meanwhile, the lean continues to grow. The first to silence debate are the structural engineers. There is a series of massive flaws in the tower which break every rule Giorgio Macchi knows.
In spite of our knowledge of structures we have as designers of bridges or other structures, I found here special problems. The shape of the tower is not the usual shape, and every engineering judgment was wrong in this case.
The tower is a hollow cylinder, 12 meters wide. In most places, the walls are almost 3 meters thick. But corkscrewing through the walls is a staircase wide enough for 2 Pisans to climb side by side. An extravagant design, which means that in some places, the walls are under 1 meter thick. This would be just adequate if the walls were solid marble.
But this marble facing is only 25 centimeters thick. And behind it there is a conglomerate of stones and lime, which is a very, very low resistance.
The infill of stones and lime is not consistent. There are several large holes in this conglomerate, created by the medieval builder's wooden scaffold.
The holes are some 40 centimeters high holes, so they reduce the resistance area of the wall in a considerable way.
The marble is more than a facade. It provides most of the support for the 14,000-ton tower and bears the stress created by the lean. That's why many of these bricks are breaking up. Although some of these cracks are superficial, one may be the start of total collapse. Macchi must find out if the tower has a flash point. Researchers create a computer model which detects the tower's excessive structural stress and then highlights it in blue. There is marble under immense pressure right below the lean on the south side of the second story at floor level, where a doorway meets the staircase. The tower is about to burst right here.
By calculation, we found that this is the really critical point. And this is shown by the fact that there were very many substitutions of stones in this area. You can see here is the original stone. These are completely substituted stones here and there, and completely substituted in this area.
Because of the tower's immense importance to Pisa, it has always been well maintained. For centuries, whenever a marble block has become damaged, a new one has been chiseled out and fitted into the tower. So far, this has prevented collapse, but traditional maintenance will no longer contain the extreme stress on the second story. When the marble here gives way, the tower won't just crumble. The tensions accumulated over centuries will be instantaneously unleashed, and the entire structure will be blown to smithereens. In 1992, in a desperate attempt to contain these forces, plastic-coated metal tendons are wrapped tight around the second story. The cracks are clamped shut, but the lean is still increasing. The committee has always accepted that a long-term solution for the tower will rely on a reduction of the lean. Perhaps with the structure slightly strengthened by tendons, there will be time to develop a technique to achieve this. The first phase of the research is to identify the original cause of the lean. The patient must cling to life in intensive care, while the engineers delve into 800-year-old mysteries. Medieval Italy was tower mad. Skylines like this one at San Gimignano, just south of Pisa, were commonplace. For the princes and merchants, the bigger your tower, the more wealth and power you projected. Today, Pisa is a quiet university town. But medieval Pisa was an aggressive trading power and one of the richest cities in the world. Piero Pierotti is a historian at Pisa University. Although not on the committee, he is an authority on the tower's past.
It's said that the most important families in Pisa dined off gold plates because they'd grown very rich from seagoing trade, and this wealth must have inspired them to do something outstanding for the city.
In 1064, just inside the north wall of the city, work began on a massive cathedral. The wedding cake-like tiers of marble columns were an early expression of the architectural style that would later embellish the tower. Inside were more colonnades. Horizontal layers of black and white marble drew worshippers towards the artistic climax, the apse, with its mosaic of Christ in majesty. The Pisans planned to give their new cathedral the most extravagant bell tower the world had ever seen, but this was civic hubris and reached beyond good building practice.
While all the other monuments of the piazza have been signed by their architects, the architect of the tower is unknown. It's a mystery. Nobody put their name on the tower. The masons must have realized that the plan for the tower was overambitious.
The medieval Pisans were experienced tower builders. Their suspicions about the cathedral bell tower suggest it was doomed from the start, and is probably only hanging on thanks to some ancient technique that the masons kept secret. Architectural historian Jane Morley is not on the committee, and so is free to voice fears they must keep to themselves.
I don't think anyone, short of God, will understand what it took to build this tower and why it's doing what it's doing now. The people that built this were not scientists or engineers. They probably had very little formal education. They were builders, and they had a lot of knowledge. Knowledge that isn't quantified or codified. It's what you learn by doing. It's what you learn by being a builder.
With neither plans nor blueprints for the tower, the past must be deduced from the marble masonry itself. Carlo Vigiani is an engineer and committee member.
Each stone layer is precise within less than a millimeter. And this is the reason why we can get so many information just by measuring these stones. You can see that in most of the stone there is no mold at all at the contact between the two stones. It depends on the high quality of workmanship.
From out of the marble emerges the tortured history of the origins of the Lean. Constructing the tower was a phenomenal achievement, which will enthuse the engineers, even though it will, at first, bewilder them. Work began in 1172, and after about 6 years, the masons had reached the 4th level. But then they stopped. The tower was abandoned for almost a century. This was probably due to political and economic strife. But perhaps the delay was a brilliant building strategy.
If they'd built the tower in one go, it literally would have fallen over as this one is. You can just see it settling down. It's just collapsed. And that's what would have happened if they'd built it all in one shot. So what they actually did was they built the tower up to a little above the 3rd story, and then they stopped. And the weight of that tower in that state squeezed the underlying ground. And over the years, the ground became stronger. So when they came back 100 years later, it could take the full weight of the tower.
When construction did resume, the masons must have noticed a slight lean to the north. So as they built upwards, they straightened the tower.
What they did is to have slightly higher stones on the side where the tower was leaning.
But as it was straightened, the tower lurched in the opposite direction, south. And when the masons reached the 7th story, work stopped again. Over the next 90 years, the southward lean grew to 1.5 degrees. A severe inclination that did not deter the masons from adding a bell chamber.
When they started again to construct the bell tower, they had to make a substantial correction. And they did it by changing the number of steps according to the direction. In this side, we are on the north side, we have only 4 steps. We will see that on the opposite side, we have 6 steps. Now we are on the south side, where the steps are 6, just to correct for the inclination. I feel this tower personally as a challenge. I cannot conceive the men constructing it knowing that it was progressively leaning and going on and finishing it.
Vigiani may be impressed, but thanks to the delays and corrections over generations of masons, the tower is shaped like a question mark.
You had different people working on it at different times with different states of knowledge about what structures like this can do, what they can't do, what happens to them over time. And you've got different sections of the tower that are different geometries. So to write at any degree, you may not get the predicted structural action that you would want.
By the early 90s, years of scientific research have produced a painful conclusion. The more the Leaning Tower is studied, the more questions it poses. But enthused by the determination of the medieval masons, the engineers do not give up. They are on the verge of startling discoveries. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is the most intensely observed building in the world. A surveyor takes readings twice a day. A circular sensor, which can register the vibration from a footstep, runs around the inner walls. Brackets gauge shifts in each of the tower's 25 largest cracks. 3 plumb lines hang from the top level. Taut cross wires measure deformations in the walls. Skeptics claim that all the monitors will do is record the collapse in absurd detail, but discoveries have been made. The tower reacts to changes in the elements. Every day, the entire building sways in a minute circle less than 0.2 of a millimeter across. This infrared camera shows why. The lens is sensitive to heat, which is displayed as white. As the sun heats the south side more than the north, the marble here expands, creating an imbalance and motivating the lean. At night, it will cool down and shrink back. Larger movements are recorded during rainstorms.
We get these extraordinarily heavy storms in Pisa, and the water table rises very quickly indeed. And it rises on one side more than on the other, and it lifts that side. It happens to be the north side. It lifts the north side a bit, so the tower goes to the south when the water table comes up.
Carlo Vigiani has studied the tower for 35 years and is unperturbed by this idiosyncratic behavior.
Probably in this moment the tower feels very sad and increases its reading. But when the sun will come back, I say she, probably I say it will come back again.
Sensitivity to the elements suggests the tower was founded in very fluid soil. Between Pisa and the nearby coast is an alluvial marsh. The engineers suspect this is what the ground around the tower looked like before construction began. On the marsh's exposed shoreline, John Burland wonders what effect this ground might have had upon the tower.
Well, about 10,000 years ago, the location of the tower was actually a river estuary, and the tide would come in and out, and the floods would come down each year, and they'd deposit sand and silt. Well, the soil beneath the tower was actually very much like this beach. It's soft, you sink into it, and that's what they actually built the tower on. And the reason why it's leaning is because the soil on the south side is just a little bit more compressible than on the north side.
In Bergamo, in the far north of Italy, a team of scientists performs an ingenious experiment in which they attempt to reconstruct Pisa's geological history. An aluminium model of the tower, less than a meter high, is placed upright on sand which has been carefully arranged to mimic the silt below Pisa's tower. Sandy silt and metal tower are then lowered into a centrifuge which will create immense pressures to simulate the effect of hundreds of years of gravity. Centuries are compressed into weeks. As the model is taken out of the centrifuge, it leans just like the real thing. When disassembled, the experiment reveals how the tower sank lopsidedly through soil as soft and inconsistent as a beach. The engineers have at last explained why the lean began. Now they must develop a technique to reverse the lean and so save the tower. The tower has always been cared for by a board of works called the Opera, whose presidents represent an unbroken line of craftsmen going back to the 11th century. In the Opera archives are thousands of schemes for the Leaning Tower, sent in from all over the world. Some were devised by qualified engineers, others by school children. Most schemes involve propping, but a huge prop would be unacceptable in the historic Italian piazza and would probably destroy the tower anyway.
A lot of people say, why can't we just prop it, or why can't we just push it back? And this experiment shows why that's about the most dangerous thing you could do, in fact. The mason is represented by this acrylic cylinder, and this weight here applies weight to the top of the tower. We'll increase the inclination of the tower and prop it or push it, and you can see what happens. It just literally collapses.
By the early 90s, the committee still haven't agreed a plan for a permanent reversal of the lean, so they decide to compromise, to be less ambitious.
We felt that the tower was very close to falling over, and we needed to do something urgently to temporarily stabilize it.
The engineers looked through previous studies of the tower. The first precise measurements were made in 1817 by two British architects, Edward Cressy and George Taylor. The lean was just over 5 degrees, but this was a static observation. Regular surveys have been made since 1911, and from study of this data, a breakthrough is achieved. The tower has stopped settling into the silt. The ground has hardened, and the tower is no longer sinking. It's tilting over, capsizing.
And as soon as we discovered that, we thought, if this side is coming up, then it's rather like sitting on a sailing boat. If you can just lean out, you can pull it back a little bit. Surely it would be safe to put temporarily some load here to reduce the tendency for the tower to fall over.
In July 1993, the contractors start piling 600 tons of lead ingots on the rising north side. There is always the risk that the ground might give way again and the tower start to sink, then crash.
We did this very gradually over a 4 or 5 month period, putting the lead weight on, leaving it for a day, making measurements, putting another one on, and so on.
As an emergency stabilization, the lead ingots work. For the first time in 800 years, the lean is under control, but the beautiful tower has become an eyesore. Burland concentrates on an alternative solution, which might provide long-term security for the tower.
This model demonstrates the soil extraction technique. We drill in under the tower with a specially designed drill which causes no disturbance to the ground. And when it's at the location we want it, we can then gently pull the drill out. So if we look at this, the soil will then close in the cavity, and we'll see the tower rotating back towards the north side as we under-excavate. A 10% reduction in inclination will reduce the stresses by 10% in the masonry, and that's a very reasonable amount.
In Pisa, a concrete test tower is constructed. It's taller and heavier on the south side, and so applies the same force on the ground as the real Leaning Tower. Here, a full-scale experiment is conducted.
And we were extracting soil over a length of this sort, and you can see here how the ground has subsided, and that brought the whole trial footing northwards by about half a degree.
But some committee members have doubts about soil extraction.
Such intervention has been tested on a specimen, and this works very well. But to extend this intervention under the tower in this special situation which has been formed in 700 years, there is still a residual risk, and the committee is thinking about that.
Penso ha fatto adesso un rapporto dettagliato. Loro hanno valutato la distribuzione delle.
At tense committee meetings, Carlo Vigiani becomes a lonely apostle for soil extraction.
If we go back by half a degree, then even if the worst happens, which is that the tower starts to move again as soon as we leave it, we'll have more than 300 years ahead of us.
Sul secondo punto che non sia indispensabile, sarebbe bellissimo riuscire a risolvere problemi così.
I'm a bit puzzled by what Carlo's saying. What do you mean, go back 300 years?
Carlo vi dice torniamo indietro di 300 anni e quindi ci rimettiamo, cioè anche questo lo prendo.
There is so much at stake, it's hard to reach an agreement, especially with so many experts.
What is very peculiar of this committee is that it is a multidisciplinary committee. There are people from the side of history of art, of restoration, and engineers, geotechnical engineers, structural engineers. And it is not easy to work together for such differently minded people.
E la torre si ricominciasse a muovere alla velocità che aveva nel 1990.
The people who are not technical have to be convinced that what we want to do is appropriate for the tower and safe. So it's incumbent upon the engineers to explain to them in simple terms what it is they're wanting to do and why it will be effective.
By the mid-90s, the balance of opinion appears to be swinging away from soil extraction. In fact, the committee is about to opt for an alternative solution, one which will take the tower closer to collapse than it has ever been. There have been 16 committees set up to save the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and there have been many previous interventions. All have failed. The most disastrous and instructive meddling was the digging of this trench around the base of the tower.
This is called the Catino. It's a walkway, and it was excavated by an architect called Gheradesca in 1838. Now it's important to remember that the tower has settled about 3 meters since it was built.
As a result of the settlement, the base of the columns on the ground floor had become buried beneath the ground.
And Gheradesca argued that it would be lovely to reveal them so that people walking around the piazza could view the base of the columns as the original architect had intended them to be. So he just came in and dug this out, and he dug down about 1.5 to 2 meters down, and this is the wall of the Catino. What he didn't realise was that the water table is about here. So there's a lot of water behind this wall and under the foundations, and as he dug this Catino out, the water came spouting out of the ground, and the tower moved. The top of the tower moved about 0.5 metre. It lurched, literally, this way. It's amazing that it didn't fall over.
At least this dreadful history tells the present committee what not to do.
When anybody has tried to do anything on the south side, the tower has always said, "Don't touch me. I'm very, very delicate." And it's moved. So the tower has actually spoken to us through the way that it's moved.
So caution is wise, but visitors to the tower grow impatient. By the mid-90s, Pisa's vital tourist industry appears to be struggling. Through this elegant window, the committee have a clear view of what they have achieved after 5 years of debate: the hideous lead ingots. In desperation, they turn to the structural engineers, who propose a very high-risk subsoil intervention.
The committee would like first to remove the lead waste and to substitute them with invisible cables in the soil, giving the same effect.
In this plan, anchors will be attached to a concrete ring wrapped around the base of the tower. These will then be drilled through the soft soil and secured in the solid bedrock 40 meters down. The pull from the anchors will replace the push of the unattractive lead weights. In 1995, contractors attempt to install the ring through which the anchors will be connected to the tower. The reinforced concrete ring is constructed under the Catino, beneath the water table. So, as the contractors burrow down, liquid nitrogen, which has a temperature of almost 200 degrees below zero, is injected into the soil. Any groundwater is frozen solid, so cannot flow into the diggings. This precaution triggers the events locals will come to know as Black September. Throughout this difficult period, safeguarding the Piazza dei Miracoli remains the responsibility of the opera president, Ranieri Favilli.
There was a time in which, to tell the truth, I began to imagine I was hearing strange noises during the night. I can't say I didn't worry about this. Unfortunately, it's inevitable, because first of all, I'm a Pisan, and secondly, I would frankly be very unhappy to go down in history as the opera president under whom the tower fell.
It's shortly after freezing moves to the sensitive south side that, on the 6th of September, the top of the tower lurches 1.5 millimeters south.
In one night it moved what it normally moved in a year, and that worried us, because if that had continued, that would have been very large and the tower's stability may have been in jeopardy.
Burland flies out to Pisa, where he's joined by Giorgio Macchi, one of the scheme's main advocates. Perhaps because there's no fractious committee to dispute it, a restabilization is begun almost immediately. The lurch is halted by piling on 300 tons more lead. . the attempt to remove this eyesore has only made it worse. But later, Mackie makes light of Black September.
There was a so small inclination southward that would be nearly impossible to measure with the old means. But we knew that the tower was moving, was responding in a special way, and we decided to stop the work.
This committee, what has it done? It's intervened basically in that same highly delicate zone where Gheradesca had intervened. And all they did is bring the tower closer to collapse.
One would believe, if one were of a late 20th century technocratic mentality, or just simply have a faith in science, well, we know so much. Why can't we come up with a solution to the problem? But there may be, in fact, no solution.
The building site around the tower remains quiet for a year. Then, in late 1996, because of a dispute within the Italian government, the committee is disbanded. Their extensive research may have been a complete waste of time and effort.
It's been very frustrating. A lot of my friends say to me, how can you possibly stand the way this has gone on and on and on and on? Why don't you just resign? It would be so much easier. But it's so important to the life of the tower that we do something soon.
The committee remains out of action until, in autumn 1997, north of Pisa, near Assisi, birthplace of St. Francis, an earthquake measuring almost 6 on the Richter scale hits. Thousands are left homeless. Unique historic buildings are damaged beyond repair. It soon emerges that although this earthquake was no surprise, little was done to prepare for it. The resulting scandal inspires a new dynamic attitude in Italian restoration and conservation. In Pisa, the committee is reconvened, has a change of heart, and, in late 1998, finally approves soil extraction.
Now we're faced with the reality of doing something on the tower for the first time, something very delicate, and something that we hope will provide the final solution.
But there is no margin for error left now. So before the final solution begins, the engineers will weave a network of steel cables into a harness for the tower.
The harness is a temporary safeguard structure. It's there to make quite certain that if something goes wrong, we can control it. It's only temporary. It'll only be there when we're operating on the tower.
During an unsettling deluge, the first cable of the harness is craned into position. Although only temporary, this is a huge project. Just 10 yards of this cable weighs half a ton. If it lashes out from the crane, it could kill the workmen and damage the fragile tower. The cable slips and jams into a marble arch. Hours later, the struggle to free the cable is successful. That night, the first component of the harness is secured. The completed harness appears to be an attempt to prop up the tower, But propping had previously been dismissed. In fact, these hefty cables anchored to massive tripods are finely balanced and apply very little force to the fragile masonry.
The harness is not intended to stop a catastrophic failure. It's not for that at all. It's simply to hold the tower gently if the movements of the tower are unexpected.
By February 1999, the scene is set for a major intervention.
We have just started soil extraction. The drill is about 5 meters below ground level. And then the soil extraction takes place beneath the floor of the catino. And the effect extends out. As we take the soil out, the effect of it extends under the tower.
The success of soil extraction hinges on the assumption that the ground below the tower is almost pure silt. On day one, 27 litres of soil spews out of the extractor casing, but it looks like clay, not silt. Burland is quick to make an on-the-spot analysis.
An experienced soils engineer can tell exactly what the soil material is. If you just put a grain or two against your teeth, you can tell straight away that this is actually a sandy silt. It feels like clay, but it's actually a sandy silt. So it's total confirmation of what we were expecting.
The tower has been creeping south for centuries, and so the lean will not be reversed in a few hours. Right now, the main fear is that the drilling will trigger a catastrophic movement further south. The monitors reveal no negative response from the tower.
We have started what could well turn out to be the final stabilization measures. The result will be that the tower will be leaning at 10% less than it is now, and we will have added 300 years to its life at least, and we will have reduced the stresses in the masonry. And these have been our prime objectives right from the start of the whole project.
After 2 months of soil extraction, the top of the tower has moved 6 millimeters north. Finally, the medieval enigma appears to be under the control of science and engineering. But the stable position of 300 years ago lies almost half a meter further north. Even if the operation goes well, it will take about 2 years to move the tower back this far. Until then, the Leaning Tower of Pisa will remain wired in and strapped up like a hospital patient on the operating table.